My name is Grace Whitmore, and I've always been the sensible sister. The teacher, the quiet one. The woman who made safe choices, while my older sister Candace chased luxury, power, and status like her life depended on it. But nothing in our long and complicated history compared to what she did on the day of my wedding. It happened right there in the middle of the ceremony. The chapel was quiet, sunlight spilling through stained glass windows. I had just taken Daniel's hand at the altar, his smile calm and steady. The pastor was about to say the words, "If anyone here objects," when I heard it, heels clacking sharply against stone, and then her voice slicing through the silence like a knife. "This is a joke!" Candace shouted, rising from her pew in a swirl of expensive fabric and righteous outrage. "You're throwing your life away, Grace! You're marrying a waiter! A waiter, for God's sake!" I felt the breath in the room catch, 100 pairs of eyes swinging toward us. My mother sank lower in her seat. Someone coughed awkwardly. Daniel simply squeezed my hand, a quiet calm pulsing through his fingers. I looked Candace straight in the eyes, and I smiled, because she had no idea who Daniel really was. She didn't know the man she had just humiliated in front of all our friends and family was the heir to one of the largest restaurant empires on the East Coast. That the waiter she mocked was born into more generational wealth and work ethic than her hedge fund husband had ever dreamed of. And she certainly didn't know what was waiting at the reception. So I smiled. Not out of smugness, but because I knew something she didn't. The storm she started would end with her stunned silent beneath crystal chandeliers, and the man she mocked would show more grace than she'd ever known. Let her scream! That wasn't the real show. The real reveal was still coming, and it would change everything. Candace and I weren't always like this. Growing up in a small New Hampshire town, we used to share a room, secrets, even dreams, but somewhere along the way, maybe when she got into NYU and I stayed closer to home for Princeton, our paths started to split. Hers shot toward champagne galas and weekend yachts. Mine settled into classroom walls and lesson plans. When she married Brandon, a hedge fund manager 10 years her senior, the entire Whitmore family treated it like royalty had arrived. I still remember my father whispering, "She did it. She made it out." And there I was, standing in the corner, a freshly graduated English major with student debt and a $38,000 a year job lined up. That was the beginning of it, when Candace began to look at me like I was a charity case in sensible shoes. Over the years, she became sharper with her judgments. Every time we met, there were comments wrapped in silk. "Still driving that old Camry?" Or, "I admire how you live so simply. It's humbling." I never fired back, not once. I just smiled, drank my water with lemon, and changed the subject. But things escalated when I told her about Daniel. Daniel Rivera was managing a cozy Italian restaurant just outside Boston when we met. He was wiping down tables, greeting customers by name, moving like he belonged there. He offered me extra napkins when I spilled soda on my skirt. We talked for 2 hours after my meal, and by the second date, I knew I was looking at the man I wanted to build a life with. When I told Candace, she laughed. Not the polite kind, the kind that lets you know you've disappointed her deeply. "You're dating a waiter, Grace? With your education? With our family name?" "He's more than that," I said. "Oh, I'm sure," she replied, sipping her wine. "I bet he's very passionate about lasagna." That was Candace. Everything measured in dollars, degrees, and designer labels. What she didn't know, and what Daniel and I had agreed to keep quiet, was that he wasn't just a restaurant manager. He was the Rivera, the only son of the late Rafael Rivera, founder of Rivera Hospitality Group, a chain of restaurants, boutique hotels, and private dining clubs across the eastern seaboard. But Daniel had made a promise to his father before he passed. He would learn the business from the ground up. So after leaving his executive position at the top, he went back to the bottom. No name tags, no corner office. Just grease-stained aprons and 12-hour shifts on his feet. "I want to know every job I'll one day oversee," he told me. "The moment I forget what it's like to mop the floor is the moment I lose the right to lead." I loved him for that, not just for the principle, but for how he lived it. So he told no one. Not my family, not even my mother. who, bless her heart, was too polite to pry, but always looked confused about how we afforded dinner at places with valet parking. Daniel said it best. Let them judge. It'll make the reveal that much more delicious. The wedding was planned to reflect us. Small, meaningful, deeply personal. We chose a chapel in the Vermont woods, with white oak pews and soft organ music. Nothing like Candace's four-tiered vineyard affair in Napa. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Candace became increasingly hostile. She cornered my mother with warnings, told my aunt not to waste a plane ticket, convinced two cousins that I was making a mistake out of desperation. And still, I didn't break. Because Daniel wasn't the gamble she believed. He was the truth she couldn't recognize, because she'd forgotten what authenticity looked like. But she'd remember soon enough, in front of everyone, and there'd be no wine glass fancy enough to hide behind when that moment came. The morning of our wedding was still and crisp, the early October air just cool enough to make everything feel clear and alive. The chapel stood like something out of a painting, tucked between tall pines, its weathered stone and wood beams wrapped in soft sunlight. Inside the bridal suite, I sat still as my mother adjusted my veil with hands that trembled more from emotion than age. "You look beautiful," she whispered, brushing a curl behind my ear. "And ready." I smiled, more grateful than I could say. The months leading up to this day had been a whirlwind of whispered criticisms, half-hearted RSVPs, and tension so thick it made my shoulders ache. But today, none of that mattered. I was marrying Daniel, the man who brought me tea when I had migraines, who read poetry with me on rainy Sundays, who knew exactly when to stay silent and when to speak. I thought we were finally past the hard part, until the chapel doors swung open. It was midway through the ceremony. Daniel and I had just exchanged vows, our hands clasped tightly as the pastor turned to the congregation with the traditional phrase, "If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." There was a breath, a moment of stillness, and then, click, 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 the sound of high heels, unmistakable, calculated. Candace rose from her seat, with the poise of a woman stepping onto a stage she believed she owned. "This is insane," she announced, her voice carrying through the chapel like a siren. "Grace, you're making a mistake. You're throwing your life away." The pastor froze. Murmurs rippled through the pews. Daniel's hand didn't move in mine, but I could feel the tension tighten in his fingers. Candace's dress was a deep navy silk, tailored within an inch of its life, and her lipstick was immaculate. Her expression? Controlled outrage. The kind that made it clear she'd rehearsed this. "You're marrying a waiter, Grace," she snapped. "Have you completely lost your mind? You graduated top of your class. You had options, and now this?" I looked at her, steady. My father tried to hush her from the front row. "Candace, that's enough." But she pushed forward, her heels echoing like judgment down the stone aisle. "Don't come crying to me when you're stuck clipping coupons in a studio apartment over a pizza joint." I didn't respond. Neither did Daniel. He simply glanced at me with that same patient calm, his eyes shining with a kind of mischief that only I recognized. "Should we tell her?" he mouthed playfully. I gave a tiny shake of my head. "Not yet." Candace threw up her hands in disgust and turned on her heel, marching out of the chapel like a queen in exile. Her exit was punctuated by the groaning of the oak doors behind her, and a silence so thick you could hear the breath of every person in the room. The pastor cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" I turned to Daniel, my voice calm, unwavering. "Yes," I said, "please." The rest of the ceremony unfolded like something sacred. The air felt lighter without Candace's presence. Our vows settled deeper. The applause felt warmer. And when we walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, there was something electric in the air, like everyone knew they had just witnessed the first act of something far more dramatic than they'd expected. Outside, the sky had brightened. Our guests tossed dried lavender and smiled with relief. Daniel helped me into a sleek, vintage Rolls-Royce that had pulled up beside the chapel steps. The leather smelled rich and worn, and the engine purred quietly beneath us. "Nice rental," I teased. He grinned. "From my personal collection." I laughed, resting my head on his shoulder. "You think she'll show?" "Oh, she'll show," he said with certainty. Candace wouldn't miss a chance to critique our centerpieces and sniff at the dessert table. She probably thinks we're serving cupcakes and boxed wine. I looked out the window as the trees blurred past, the Vermont colors blazing like fire. She has no idea what's coming. Daniel kissed my temple. She will soon. And with that, we drove off toward the second act, where truth, like the best wine, had been waiting patiently to be uncorked. The Rivera Grand Reserve sat atop a quiet bluff overlooking the water, its limestone facade glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. Most people in Boston knew the name. Few had ever been inside. It wasn't the kind of place you booked on OpenTable. It was by invitation only, if you were lucky. And that afternoon, it was closed to the public, reserved entirely for our wedding reception. As our car pulled up to the entrance, I could see guests stepping out of shuttles, their faces registering surprise, then disbelief. I heard someone behind us whisper, "Wait, is this the Rivera Grand? How did they swing that?" Daniel helped me out of the car, his hand steady at my back. He wore the same calm smile he always did, but I knew better. His eyes were dancing with anticipation. He'd waited years for this moment, not to flaunt anything, but to reveal who he really was, not just to my family, but to everyone who had ever underestimated what humility could hide. The doormen bowed and opened the massive glass doors. Inside, the air was cool, fragrant with rosemary and citrus. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, reflecting off marble floors. Servers in white gloves moved silently between guests, carrying champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres plated like art. The effect was immediate. People slowed their steps. Conversations turned to murmurs. This wasn't just elegant, it was elite. Too elite for someone like me, they were likely thinking, and far too elite for a waiter. And then came Candace. She arrived 20 minutes late, as always. Her heels clicked across the floor with practiced grace, until she stopped short. I watched from across the room as she scanned the space. Her brows pulled together. "This must be a mistake," she said aloud, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "They don't do weddings here." She strode toward me with a strained smile. "Grace, sweetheart, what is this place? Did someone pull some strings?" Before I could answer, a voice behind me said smoothly, "No strings, just family." Daniel stepped beside me, perfectly at ease, perfectly in control. Candace blinked at him. I thought you worked at Trattoria del Luca?" "I did, still do sometimes," he said. "Great kitchen, learned a lot there. But this is the Rivera Grand. And I'm Rivera," he replied gently. She didn't understand at first. It took a few seconds. Then she frowned. "Rivera? Like Rivera Hospitality Group?" A new voice interrupted before Daniel could respond. "Daniel!" Heads turned. An elderly man in a crisp navy suit approached, his cane tapping lightly against the floor. His silver hair was combed neatly, and his presence silenced the room, as though gravity itself bent around him. "Grandfather," Daniel said, smiling. Alfonso Rivera pulled Daniel into a firm hug, then turned to me and kissed my cheek. "So, this is the woman who finally convinced my grandson to stop hiding in kitchens." He turned to Candace last. "And you must be the sister. I heard you caused quite the scene at the church." Candace flushed. I didn't know." "Ah, yes," Alfonso said coolly. "Didn't know my grandson was just a server. That's what you called him, no?" A champagne flute slipped from Candace's fingers and shattered against the floor. No one moved to help. No one even flinched. All eyes were on her, those who had heard her loud objections hours earlier, now witnessing the truth in all its clarity. "I was trying to protect my sister," she said feebly. "You thought his job defined his worth," Alfonso replied. "It's a common mistake, but a shallow one." Candace stood frozen, her mouth parted but silent. And then Daniel did something unexpected. He reached out a hand. Stay, he said softly. Enjoy the evening. There's enough room for everyone here, if they're willing to see people for who they are, not what they do. Gasps and murmurs fluttered around us like leaves. Candace looked at him, stunned. After everything I said? Gracefully, he nodded. That's exactly why. I didn't need to say anything. I just slipped my arm through Daniel's and smiled. Candace hesitated, then finally nodded, her voice barely audible. I'd like that. Alfonso cleared his throat. Then perhaps we can move past the drama and let these two enjoy their first dance? As Daniel led me to the center of the room, the music swelled. I glanced over my shoulder and caught a glimpse of Candace standing alone, eyes glossy, posture humbled, watching a truth she never expected to see. This wasn't just a reveal. It was a reckoning. And it had only just begun. 10 months passed. Daniel and I moved into a modest brownstone overlooking Boston Harbor. Despite his wealth, we lived quietly, intentionally. I kept teaching, and he spent his days rotating through Rivera properties, checking in on chefs, mentoring young staff, and meeting with vendors. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was ours. Candace, meanwhile, went quiet. For a while, then, as if on cue, she resurfaced, but this time, not with a sharp remark or a photo from St. Bart's. This time she arrived on our doorstep at 11:40 p.m. on a rainy Thursday night, drenched in designer silk and mascara. They're taking everything, she whispered, her voice barely recognizable. The house? The car? Brandon's under federal investigation. Insider trading. Fraud. I don't know what to do. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. The kind that didn't need words. I led her into the living room. She sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, eyes darting between the fireplace and the floor, like she couldn't bear to look at either of us directly. I've never started over before, she said after a long silence. I don't know how. Daniel set his laptop aside and leaned forward. There's an apartment above one of our smaller restaurants in Cambridge. It's small, nothing fancy, but it's clean, safe. A good place to start. Candace's eyes widened, surprised. You'd do that? After how I treated you? On one condition, I said gently. You work. In the restaurant. Not in an office or behind a desk. You start where Daniel started. You do the work. Dish pit, tables, prep line, closing shifts. All of it. She stared at me in stunned silence. I'm not punishing you, I added. I'm offering you a chance. The kind of chance you never gave anyone else. There was a long pause, then she nodded. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it, but I don't know how to be good at anything real. You'll learn, Daniel said, standing. We all did. And so she began. The next week, Candace moved into the apartment with 2 suitcases and no staff to unpack them. She traded silk blouses for black non-slip shoes and an apron. On her first shift, she dropped an entire tray of water glasses and cried in the walk-in freezer. But she showed up the next day, and the day after that. Humility isn't something you can fake. You earn it, in sweat, silence, and scraped knuckles. And for the first time, Candace was earning hers. 6 months later, I stopped by the Cambridge location just before the dinner rush. The place buzzed with controlled chaos, orders flying in, pans clattering, laughter echoing from the back, and there, at the pass, was Candace. Hair pulled into a tight bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, no jewelry, no gloss, just focus. She was calling out orders with confidence, balancing plates with ease, and moving like someone who finally understood the rhythm of real work. She's earned their respect, Daniel said beside me, nodding toward the kitchen. The staff trusts her. They know she's not pretending. After her shift, we sat her down at a quiet corner booth. How would you feel about managing this place? Daniel asked casually. Candace froze, eyes wide. Me? You'd trust me with that? You've earned it, I said. You've shown up every single day. Not once have you played the victim. You learned the whole operation from the inside out. She swallowed hard. I never thought I'd say this, but I love this job. I love earning something. Tears rimmed her lashes. I used to think success meant being admired, she whispered. Now I know. It's being respected, for who you are, not what you wear. At the next family gathering, she wore her Rivera uniform like armor. Not to impress, but to stand tall. And this time, no one laughed. Because she wasn't a punchline anymore. She was proof that people could change, if they were willing to get their hands dirty and their hearts open. And that was the most beautiful success of all.